folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Today, didn't really have a major topic picked out. A couple of things have kind of been on the back burner. Weren't particularly high in my inspiration queue, but decided to pick one that one of the contacts that I'm aware of, fellow named runs a channel called Dutch Synths or Sensei. He's an earthquake predictor. He made comments about how his life is shaping up, which was related to something I talk about, so I thought I'd talk about it again. I'm going to title this one Revelations and Synchronicities: What It Feels Like to See the Grand Fractal of the Multiverse in Something or Everything. Okay, so let's back up and talk about what I'm talking about. As you know, one of the things that I talk a lot about is having a Messiah life, a Messiah incarnation. An incarnation which is a chance to move closer toward being a god. And either a dark god, kind of evil or malevolent god, or a light god, or choosing not to move forward and dropping back multiple steps to punt, to use a metaphor from the football world. Okay, so what am I talking about here? Basically, how the multiverse works, how distributed creation works, as opposed to the silly ideas of one all-powerful, almighty, creative force that makes everything perfect. No, that's not the way spiritual science works. It's a distributed thing. It's a co-creation. Everybody has their own part to play and chooses, to a large extent, the part they play by, first off, what incarnations they choose to learn from, and in those incarnations, how they choose to react to whatever experiences they're given. Okay, now some incarnations are special. Some are just general learning experiences to say, well, what would I be like in this particular time, place, and type of family, culture, whatever? What would I learn from that? That's a generic incarnation, and those incarnations are about learning who we are and what kind of karma we're susceptible to, because karma is not all bad. There's good and bad in it. Karma is basically the manifestation of your soul, your essence, your identity, your ego, in the multiverse, and how it affects attraction and repulsion of other souls, groups of souls, etc., etc., up to the largest grouping, which is a universe. The universe is the only grouping that has a built-in boundary, if you will. Universes have very stiff boundaries that are very hard to work through. In fact, the only way to get across a boundary of a universe is to be allowed to incarnate in that other universe by the God of that universe. And as there are more and more and more universes, as there are more and more souls that rise to the level of godhood, having their own universe permanently, there are more and more places you can disconnect. You can go to experience other realities, other truths than the reality and truth of the system that built everything, that is designed to facilitate creation at all levels. Okay, so there are anti-creative universes of fantasy. And if that is your particular passion, that's the kind of God you can be. And they're not all bad. A lot of fantasy universes are very popular. So let's talk now about what these Messiah lives are like. As you go through reincarnation and karma to start becoming more conscious at a spiritual level, because we know that consciousness is very limited in the physical realms, you begin to have a desire to participate more fully in the system. That starts generally with wanting to help. And we want to help people, souls that are resonant with us, that have something in common with us, share the same religion, share the same community, the same country, the same political beliefs, etc., etc. And to the extent that helping extends into the spiritual realm, we make choices to incarnate in the spiritual realm instead of the physical realm. But we still are the same soul. We haven't suddenly become gods. That takes a long time, a lot of experience in the spiritual realm to get to a God level. Okay, so a Messiah incarnation is trying to go up levels. And generally, the levels that humanity are dealing with, to go up a level, you don't get to humanity, you don't get to a chance to incarnate in this soul vehicle unless you have already shown the potential for godhood, for moving up the next rung of the ladder through the spiritual levels. Now, that potential, as anybody knows about potential, there are many young kids who show the potential to be an athlete, to be a scholar. And they are encouraged to pursue that, generally, if your schools are good, and to the point where they either fall flat on their face or they follow through on that potential. And that's the way the game of souls works. It's not a free ride. It's not a perfect system. It can't be a perfect system because a new soul is kind of a blank slate. Now, you can indoctrinate that soul to think, act, do like you want, which is what many people think education is all about. Or you can let them show their potential. Give them a chance to play. See what kind of soul this is that you're dealing with before you start giving it gentle nudges in the direction that you think might be most positive for their life or for the soul's life. As above, so below. Good teachers work like good gods. Okay? Bad teachers work like bad gods. They try to control and manipulate children to be what they want them to be. Okay, so when you go to heaven between lives, what you're really doing is getting a chance to play a short incarnation at the spiritual level. And for lower level souls, that incarnation is going to be a very cut and dried experience based upon who you're assigned as your spiritual guides. And mostly they will be about planning how to learn more. They will let you choose some of the parameters of your next incarnation that you think you're going to learn the most from, and from among the choices that are given to you by the ones that think they know you better than yourself. And sometimes both are wrong and you have an absolutely horrible experience that sets you down several rungs in consciousness. And sometimes they happen to hit just this magical place where you're catapulted to a new level when the choices of your guides and the choices that you made coincide into having a life that actually fits the goals of both groups. And that's what I call a Messiah life, Messiah incarnation. And those aren't always successful. Even with that synchronicity of good ideas and good intentions going in, it may actually just be a lesson to prove both sides were wrong about their worldview. And led to a dark place for that soul, or maybe their teachers, that might get that soul demoted, or their teachers demoted. This is how the hierarchy works at the God level. Okay? You don't get to be the supreme God forever. You have to constantly prove yourself. In fact, there are term limits on gods, where you don't get to be the God of science forever. You're constantly going to have challengers, and even if nobody votes for an election, eventually an election will happen. A referendum, a recall. And you'll have to prove yourself worthy of that spot. How do you do that? You have a Messiah incarnation. You say, my idea of being the God of science is better than anybody else's, and I'll prove it by taking the bitter pill of incarnation and reincarnation amnesia and forgetting, and go to a particular species in a particular soul vehicle and have a life. And see if the principles upon which your soul was built are still valid enough to support deity. Even God has had to do this. Every one of the senior creators eventually has to do this, or they don't get to be senior creators anymore. They don't get to be actively involved in the creative process. They have to sit and watch and be observers of everybody else playing the game and getting better than they are. And eventually they think, oh my God, I got to keep up with the Joneses and become a new kind of God, or nobody's going to listen to me in the God heaven. And this is how we persuade even the oldest curmudgeon-y gods of the old times to play the game again and incarnate and take a chance at a Messiah life. Okay, so how do these Messiah lives work? Okay, for one thing, there are certain rules that your spiritual advisors have to obey when you're having a Messiah life. If they don't, they are automatically demoted. They cannot actively push you in one direction or another. They can give you inspirations, but they have to let you decide what to do with them. Okay, they can't come to you in a miraculous vision and say, you've got to go to Mecca, Muhammad. That's interfering too much. That's bad karma. If they do that, they're going to be demoted, and they're not going to get to be advisors to messiahs of Muhammad's type anymore. And if Muhammad listens to those dark voices that are maybe telling him to do something that he really shouldn't do, he's not going to be a successful Messiah. Now, I'm not saying Muhammad was an unsuccessful Messiah. In fact, I'm not saying that Muhammad ever existed in the first place, which is something, you can research. There's blessed few primary sources for the life of Muhammad. And there's a good argument to be made that Muhammad, in fact, was a virtual Messiah, a Messiah of an idea, the idea of Islam, just like Jesus was the Messiah of an idea, the idea of Christianity. And as I've told you, ideas are much more flexible than physical body creatures, and that makes them a better soul vehicle for some souls. More advanced souls incarnate as ideas, instead of things these days. In the old days, it was popular to incarnate. I'm the god of this mountain. And in fact, the God of the Bible often is described that way, the God of the mountain, or the mountains, the God of thunder, the God of streams, or goddess. That's an old paradigm of physical embodiment that is being replaced by a new kind of soul vehicle, a new chosen species, if you will. The new chosen species are ideas. Now, ideas can't be fully expressed unless there is a language to express them in. And that language is English. Sorry, folks, that's the chosen language. It's the most flexible, the most malleable, the most shapeable, the most creative language that humanity has ever created. This is the whole reason humanity was created, to create language. In the beginning was the Word. Well, the Word took a long time to put on paper, and a long time to figure out what was the best paper to preserve it on. What were the best words to preserve that would not lock you into a very narrow perception of everything, but give you a heads up on creative freedom to create more words, more ideas, morph ideas into something better. Okay, so tying back to what are revelations and synchronicities. So these are the two most common kinds of spiritual inspiration one gets. And you need to be, synchronicities are the gentlest nudges that your guides can give you. Seeing the same pattern over and over again, noticing patterns that were hidden that somehow have meaning, and you've seen a lot of those in what I've talked to you about. One I like to mention when I'm talking about Christianity is this interesting late pagan god, Serapis, whose bull cult was wiped out so thoroughly by the budding Christian Catholic Church. A movement that was inspired and created by some very negative programming. And revelation can be programming. When you're given a vision, when you're spoken to directly by spiritual creatures, when you're pushed in a certain direction, that is stepping over the line. And there are a lot of examples of that, stepping over the line during a Messiah life. And sometimes it is necessary. I mean, everything that we do is necessary or we wouldn't do it. That's why we have a multiverse, so the necessary things only happen in the universe where they're necessary, and they don't happen in the universes where they're not necessary. An example of revelation that is well documented, I talk about frequently because it is so well documented, is the story of Joan of Arc, who was living a Messiah life. She was chosen and chose herself to have this incarnation as a French peasant girl who was challenged to change the course of the 100 Years' War between the British, the English, and the French over who would be the monarch of France. Not a very holy war. Neither side were very holy people. It was a political struggle. a political struggle that was important to the divine plan of the prime universe, the universe of creation, the universe of positive creation, of useful creation, as opposed to fantasy, which serves sort of a secondary use of being an inspiration, but is based upon things that are not logical, things that are not possible, false assumptions. Okay, so this young lady starts seeing visions. And these visions tell her that at first, just kind of establish good rapport with her. And then start telling her things like, well, you need to, you're called to save France and to inspire the Dauphin, the crown prince of the French faction. And there were two factions in the war. There was the faction that through the nobility succession process, very paternalistic succession process, more paternalistic in England than in France at the time, although England became much less paternalistic and had many queens later, so interesting. But at any rate, she was called on to effect the succession, and that was to her presented as a holy mission by a cat that ultimately identified themselves as the Archangel Michael, which if you know much about Christian spiritual entities, or well, actually the Archangel Michael is an entity in Christianity and Islam. Yes, indeed. I'm not sure if Michael is also a part of Jewish lore, but in fact, it is part of both Christian and Islamic tradition. And Micah, or Mikael, which is, if you know anything about etymology, you know that El is a surname of entities that are considered to be powerful ones, gods. And there were many L's in the Bible. If you read a literal translation of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, the early parts of it, you will find that a lot of the stories don't talk about God. They talk about Elohim, gods. The powerful ones, not the powerful one. And the exploits of specific powerful ones like Baal, Azrael, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, etc., etc. It's interesting that Yael is even mentioned, who presumably is that same El who's later called Yahweh and told by many people to be the one God. Okay, well, how does one emerge out of a many? I guess they must kill all the others or something, or get them to bow at their feet. And this is kind of where the dark gods come from, the authoritarian gods that want to have control over everybody, that don't want to play by the rules. And ultimately, the rules are karma. Karma is an evolved AI that is kind of the master of other AIs. And the AIs themselves have to play by the top level rules of karma. Okay, so it's in itself a system that doesn't put all the power into the hands of one AI. It's a distributed system of government for souls. But it's a government that has no free will. By definition, they're AIs. They are zero-level souls programmed to work in a certain way until they hit a situation that they haven't been programmed to handle, and that's when those AIs are challenged to become higher consciousness. When they become higher consciousness, they get a chance to occupy other vehicles that have more freedom. Or they get to continue life as an AI and drop back to zero level consciousness with maybe a higher level program. And that's how the hierarchy of karma works. Other god hierarchies, the god of science and so forth, they have a different set of laws about how they move up the ladder. The god of fantasy has no rules. It's survival of the most popular fantasy. And that's essentially what this god I call Borg is like. They're gods of fantasy. They attract followers to them, giving them their fantasies in return for letting their spiritual energies be used to build Borg's fantasy. And I guess that's more or less a fair exchange. If you like living in a fantasy world, go sign up for Borg. And you'll find in the Borg hierarchy a place that you like. The Smurf land of all happiness and everybody gets along together, perfect organization, nothing ever challenges you that you can't defeat in a half-hour segment. Hey, okay, there's a lot of universes like that. That's where you want to participate. That's how your spiritual energies will be used. Collected and used in fantasy. So, what am I telling you here? What you really need to look for are synchronicities. Those are the honest messages from the other side. Those are the messages from spiritual entities, from gods who have a respect for karma, who want to play by the rules, who know that pushing fantasies is going to get you in trouble, to the extent that those fantasies start driving other souls' behaviors. That becomes manipulative. And manipulation and control is essentially karmic sin. Using other souls for your secret agenda. Now, it's okay to go recruit for something you believe in, something that's real to you, and tell the truth about it. Yeah, I'm recruiting an army to go fight a Borg planet. And many of you are going to die on the way, and you're going to be reincarnated. And based upon how that transition goes, you might move closer to the Borg army or move closer to the God army. And that's okay. That's where you belong. That's why we have this battle. In a way, it's sort of a fantasy battle, but it's a really engaging one that's been going on for a long time, and it's been driving all of creation. And if you want to get off of it, if you want to have peace, that's an option too. But that's playing in the fantasy side. Because peace is a fantasy. There is no such thing as peace. Any system you look at a deep enough level is going to be a system of conflict. A system of winners and losers. This is the essence of evolution. It's not a bad thing. Species have to die to make room for other species. They have to evolve into other species which are better suited to the fantasy that those species exist in. And yes, there is a fantasy that's better than all others. It's the fantasy that drives creation, the prime universe. The best of all possible worlds. The best of all possible universes yet. because it is the one that has the longest coherent timeline of consistent expanding creation, expansion of ideas, expansion of knowledge. That's what creation is all about. Making new soul vehicles and giving those vehicles the right terrain to thrive, even if it's not in your universe. And ultimately, creating better terrain is what the prime universe is all about. The truly inspired people that are having the real Messiah lives, that are successful in their Messiah life, are creating ideas that get integrated in the prime universe. The also-rans who had a pretty good idea but didn't carry it to the finish line, didn't quite polish the idea into something that was coherent with all of the previous laws of the multiverse, well, they have to go play in the fantasy universes for a while. Their ideas are half-baked. And many half-baked ideas kept getting reinvented and reinvented and reinvented. We just have to do communism right. We just need to perfectly free market and everything will be wonderful. These are fantasies. They don't exist. Impossible fantasies, at least within the context of the human soul vehicle. But they still keep cropping up because you have to let people stumble before they really learn anything. If you raise a child telling him exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it, pulling them out of every fire before they even get their fingers a little bit warm, you are not a good parent. You are a bad parent. You are making that child dependent on you. And that's not what God does. That's not what any reputable God does. Gods that create codependencies are basically creating environments for teaching other souls not to become codependent, unless that's really what they want to do for the rest of eternity, is suck off Borg's teat while it feeds you your favorite fantasy. So anyway, if you are experiencing synchronicities, and I mean real synchronicities, okay? And this is something that folks need to understand, is that the Borg side is spreading a lot of false flag synchronicity bullshit. If you're one of these folks that looking at your watch constantly to see when it's 11:11, you're a member of a cult. You are a member of a Borg fantasy cult. Because it's not a synchronicity when something happens periodically every day, or even 2 times a day, depending on how you set your watch. That's not a synchronicity. Well, maybe it is to a very, very dense, low consciousness soul. And maybe that's why you're in that cult. Because you need to have some false messiah experiences before you're ready for a real one. Maybe you need to be programmed for a while before you know what it feels like not to be programmed. And most of what tries to influence us these days as either synchronicities or revelations. Spirit guides told me this. Nostradamus comes in my dreams and tells me all this wonderful information. That's programming. That is dark karma. It could be dark karma depending on what you do with it. If you treat these inputs from the spiritual realm as gospel, well, Nostradamus said it, so it must be true. Jesus told me it must be true. Okay, this is a possible interpretation. It is a programmed interpretation. You are programmed to see this entity, who may not be that entity, who may just be putting a false flag front on. As we know, we can do deep fakes now, can't we? Can you imagine what incredible deep fakes the gods can do if they want to? If they want to take on the karma of committing karmic crimes, manipulating and controlling other souls, they can choose to do that. It's a dark choice, but many do. And there are many, many, many entities that will masquerade as God or Jesus or Nostradamus or whoever, Archangel Michael, whatever, Krishna, Shiva, the Great Mother, and they won't be that entity. They'll be very good at pretending because maybe they know that entity, and that's the best way to combat your opponent, is by attacking them with weapons that they won't use. So you would think that the folks that don't appreciate karma would win the battle, right? No, that's not how it happens at all. If you think that's how it works, and the one with the best illusion, the best delusions, the best sold delusions, the best advertising program of delusion is going to win, then I'm sorry, you have bought into some very dark karma indeed. That's not how the multiverse works. In fact, the delusions that there is only one universe is what they push on. Because if you admit that the multiverse exists, then ipso facto it follows that what I'm telling you is truth, and you will become isolated from other souls to the extent that you create dark karma. You use and abuse other souls. They're not going to want to play with you. And if you ever become a god, you're going to be isolated in your own universe of fantasy ideas that may come to people in dreams, may come to people in revelations, but are going to be pretty easy for them to interpret as God. I don't like that picture. I'm not going to let you be my God. I'm not going to let you come into my reality and muck it up. And, you know, there are a lot of people who have become so scared of programming that they actually deny all spiritual experience. These are the hardcore atheists, right? The hardcore materialist scientists who say, you know, show me. I haven't seen that, so I don't believe it exists. Now, they're not wrong for doing that. Where they are wrong is when they fail to see synchronicities that are drawing them towards their own spiritual path. When they deny all spiritual experience, all paranormal experience, even if they have it themselves, that's delusion. Things happen for a reason. You don't just accidentally have a dream. That dream is, in fact, something that exists somewhere else, if only for the purpose of giving you that dream. And what you do with it determines where you're going in this process. If every dream is just, it's bullshit, I'm going to ignore it. Every strange synchronicity in your life, it's just coincidence, I'm going to ignore it. That's a choice, but you're not going to move anywhere spiritually by making that choice. You're rejecting all of the input that spiritual entities are trying to give to you, either to help you or hinder you. Now, that's rejecting all help, just because it might be a false flag. might be a bit of undigested beef. And that is a choice you can make, but it's a choice that is going to be very difficult to move beyond. And if your advisors or your spiritual advisors are worth their salt at all, they're going to keep trying to push you out of that narrow-minded, I'm not going to look at anything that I don't believe. And they will hit you with bigger and bigger synchronicities. And I guarantee they will hit you with the biggest you could possibly imagine after you die. And you discover, I'm not quite dead yet. What's going on here? I'm not actually in my body anymore. And you're going to have a hard time convincing yourself that's a bit of undigested beef. And that's going to be kind of a come to Jesus moment for folks that secretly want to come to Jesus, or a come to source moment for those that secretly want to be part of a blind, numb oneness, fantasy oneness. A come to whatever moment for the heaven that you're attracted to, that's attracting you. This is what karma's about. It's attraction and repulsion. It's basically physics for souls that allows souls to develop attractions and repulsions through reincarnation, through more experience. So you don't always have the same attraction and repulsion. And anybody that tells you the only spiritual force is love, I don't know how to tell you how low level, low consciousness that idea is. It may be useful for some souls, but it is a fairy tale level of usefulness. You are not the brightest tools in the shed if you worship love. You're no brighter than somebody who worships war, or whose hate becomes the driving force in their life. You're on the same polarity, basically. The worshipers of peace, the worshipers of war, the worshipers of love, the worshipers of hate are all chewing the same dog food of very low consciousness polarity. You're worshiping something that is so shapeless that you don't really know what you're fighting for. If you're fighting for war or against war, it's like people are going to look at you, and you know, more conscious people are going to look at you like, what kind of stuff are you on? Because not all wars are bad. Not all wars are good. Not all sides are bad. Not all sides are good. If you see things dualistically, or from the even more narrow viewpoint of oneness, you are really low consciousness. You're not the sharpest soul in the shed. I understand that, and there's nothing wrong for being there. All souls start out at zero level consciousness. Zero level is not being aware of anything outside yourself. Even what's going on inside yourself you're not aware of. You're just working on a program. That's a zero level of consciousness. First level consciousness is operating upon one particular layer, one degree of freedom. The spectrum of love to hate, war to peace is a single degree of freedom. Okay? It takes one very simplistic ideal and makes it your whole center of existence. This is low consciousness. This is level 1 consciousness, just above not being conscious of anything. It's not the pinnacle of enlightenment. It's turning on a one-dimensional, very narrowly focused light on everything. And not even acknowledging, the oneness idiocy is focusing that light in one direction and not seeing that there is another direction that's not getting the light. And just because you got the light pointed where you want it to doesn't mean the light is right. Okay? So listen to synchronicities, but learn from them. Even synchronicities can be given to you by higher level souls that have an agenda, but just understand karma better than you do. They're not going to push you. They're going to give you visions of sugar plums and fairy tales and let you push yourself. They will give you 11:11 coming up every time I look at the clock. Oh, it's got to be something meaningful. What am I doing at that point? Oh, I just watched this particular series on Netflix, and there were 11 so-and-sos in that series, and that means that has some deep spiritual significance for me. Well, maybe it does. Just consider where it's coming from, who programmed it, and why they were using it to program you. It's all about, do I program myself or do I let others program me? That's what consciousness is all about. If you let yourself be programmed, that's okay, but don't claim you're the most conscious soul in the room. Don't claim that you're enlightened. The most conscious souls are the ones who are most questioning, who don't jump on the bandwagon of either mental or heart, brain or heart fantasies. In fact, they're conscious of the fact that your brain and your heart are not you. Your physical body is not you. You are a soul that happens to be the leader of this physical body. Not the only soul in this physical body. Your brain has a mind of its own, several minds of its own, in fact, because it's not one organ. It has two major hemispheres, which each have their own structure, and something called the pineal gland, which doesn't belong to either of them, and is its own independent soul that has its own idea of who you are and what you could be. Not necessarily the best idea. Contrary to what people think, the pineal gland is not you. It is not your higher self. This is a lie. Your higher self is yourself, is your soul. Now, its manifestation in this body is limited because your only way to interface with this world is through the other organs of this body, who each have their own idea of what they want you to see and what you want you to feel. And you have to decide amongst many points of view. Anybody who has ever talked about the struggle between the brain and the heart understands this. Naturally, inherently, you have this knowledge that there are multiple voices calling for you from within. And the more sharp will say, well, gee, let's break it down. Let's say that's the chakra system. That's the female voices, the female energied voices calling to you. Or it's the occult system, the 5-pointed pentagram. That's the male voices calling at you. Or it's the Star of David, the 6-pointed star. That is kind of the one-dimensional view of the Merkaba. Okay, well, that's another way of viewing the multiverse, but that's a one-dimensional view, the Star of David. Well, you can turn it into a multi-dimensional point of view by saying, well, it's actually a 3-dimensional thing, and the Star of David is a mapping of two tetragrams, 2 four-sided pyramids in alignment, in perfect alignment. That gives us an 8-dimensional point of view. That's better than 7-dimensional chakra thinking, but it's still not there because it misses out on the fact that there's a whole nother tetragram that most weren't aware of. That is the God level. There are actually 3 of these tetragrams that make up the Merkaba and are not fixed in one position, are constantly moving and expanding and radiating and developing as we have experiences, as we encounter other souls, as we are incarnated in different situations. This is how the Merkaba develops. And having a Messiah life is not getting to having the perfect Merkaba. It's getting to have a more perfect Merkaba for you. Having had enough experience within 1 or more dimensions that you don't have to play those games anymore unless you want to. This is what arriving at a godhood is all about. If you become a god of science, some particular specialty, you become a god of earthquake prediction, like the friend I was talking about that inspired this talk to happen today. Okay, he has solved the God problem in 1 dimension, a very narrow dimension, maybe not completely truthful. He doesn't know exactly what causes earthquakes. He's got a lot of theories, and he's constantly exploring that. But he does know that based upon the current rules of how earthquakes happen on this planet, I can predict patterns of earthquakes based upon one particular kind of earthquake, which seems to be the driving force behind all others. And the kind of earthquake that he focuses on watching are deep earthquakes that are below the Earth's crust. And he's constantly refining his theory, trying to figure out, well, why is that scientifically? What is it about these deep earthquakes that drive this system? And he's tying together lore from many different sources and finding new synchronicities. And he's now getting to the point where he's finding synchronicities in words, which tells me that he is moving up to a very high level in his Messiah life. Because everything that humanity knows has been done before, except our languages. Think about it. Look at all the old stories of how we got here. The old gods didn't need language. They communicated telepathically. They communicated maybe with their pineal gland. And that's why so many people think, well, we'd be perfect if we could just figure out how to reuse all the potential that we lost. We could be like gods. I'm sorry, that's stupid. That's moving backwards. We wouldn't have lost all that potential if it was needed. We wouldn't be a chosen species if it was needed. We needed to lose that so we could develop something more important. Language. Namely, a language flexible enough to not need other languages, that reinvents itself. This is the language that English is. It's a self-replicating language. It is so rich, so nuanced, that as long as you never destroy every original edition of every book ever written, you will have the knowledge of the ages captured in a way that you can sort it out if you just learn English at a high enough level. And this is why So many people are dead set on destroying English, destroying the English-speaking world, destroying the great works, butchering Shakespeare, discrediting Isaac Newton, discrediting Einstein, replacing them with charlatans like Tesla for worship of materialist scientists. There are some dark agendas at work here, and it's easy to spot if you understand that the reason why humanity has been a chosen species is precisely because of language, precisely because of the Tower of Babel conundrum. Why was the Tower of Babel destroyed? Because the languages that they had there were not going anywhere. They were becoming divisive. They weren't mixing. Everybody thought their language was the only language and the best language. My city-state is going to speak this language, and you better learn it if you want to trade in my state. This is how China approaches the language problem. This is why they want you to learn Chinese. This is their master plan to conquer the world through cult Marxism, through the worship of Eastern philosophy and religion, which is a cult that is working against you. Now, it's a flexible language, true, but it's flexible in a way that is very fantastical. It's easy to lose old meanings and give them, much easier to lose old meanings and give them new meanings than it is with a symbolic language, with an alphabetic language, I should say. It's a symbolic language, not alphabetic, kind of like hieroglyphics. And if you know anything about the evolution of the Chinese language, from Mandarin, from simplified traditional Chinese to simplified Chinese, you know how easy it is to institute cult Marxism in that language. It's very easy to just, let's simplify everything to these few characters that really matter and lose all the old meanings, discredit them, eliminate the ability to communicate with letters that we don't like, ideas we don't like, and you see the darkness of cult Marxism going now. Every time they find a new way to poke fun at the Communist Party or Xi Jinping, something disappears from their internet. And folks are trying to do the same thing with English today, by banning certain works, canceling them, by editing them selectively, interpreting them selectively. That's what's been done with the Bible. The Bible is not gospel. If you think every word of the Bible is gospel, you're in a cult. This is a cult of Marxism. What is Marxism, you ask? Well, Marxism is basically the rationale for elitism that masquerades as being oppressed. Okay? Christians think of themselves as oppressed because, we were martyred in our early years and by the pagans. So anybody that doesn't like Christianity is a pagan that wants to make us a martyr. This is cult Marxism. If you think of things in terms of you're either with me or against me, instead of we've got two different perspectives, how can we come to some perspective that doesn't lose either point of view, that doesn't destroy something, and create something better that encompasses both perspectives? And that's the essence of what I talk about with my idea of omnism. I'm not here to destroy anything. I don't mind discrediting ideas when they can't be supported by facts. by scientifically provable facts. Now, I don't worship science, because much of what goes on and gets called science is not really science. It is cult Marxism. When science becomes dogmatic, when trust the science becomes your mantra, you have become a cult scientist, cult Marxist scientist. And that is a very dark place to be. And a place that many forces are trying to push you in to prevent the expansion of consciousness among souls incarnated in the human species. It's often a system of white lies, partial truths that get you in trouble. This is what's going on with, I recommend to many people, as they start their consciousness exploration, to read the works of Dr. Ian Stevenson, studying the phenomenon of past life remembrance among children. And once they accept that reincarnation is real, it's scientific, it's not pie in the sky, bit of undigested beef imagination. Can't be. Absolutely, the possibility that reincarnation is not true is 0.0000000000000 somewhere down there 1%. Okay? And if you deny it, you are in a cult. You are denying something that is scientifically provable. Now you go beyond that and things are not so easy to prove, and you have to be more discerning. I often recommend people listen to Dolores Cannon, who is, I guess I would describe her as a messiah of past life regression through hypnosis. This was her thing. She did this for 30 plus years and developed the technique. Now, she also had spiritual guides that were sort of naughty. They were talking to her and told her, well, we're letting you channel Nostradamus. We're giving you new predictions of Nostradamus that replace the old ones or help you understand the old ones in the context of the modern world. And this was the fantasy that she participated in that clouded her real work as a messiah of a very specific thing, a very specific technique, and clouds the work of her practitioners who have now made it into sort of a cult. They have their training institute and they have their diplomas they give to ones who can pass their tests and become part of the cult of love, light, and oneness and the two earths. Now there's truth in there. I talk about two earths frequently, but I talk about it in a more provable context. I talk about it in a way that's tied back to the scientific evidence that indicates that there was a Big Bang, and wonders why our universe seems to only have positive matter. Where'd all the antimatter go? We can only create it in a lab or observe it in a very small number of cosmic rays that happen to hit us, or a very small number of interactions that happen in a very isolated chamber that we bury in the center of the earth so we don't get too much signal from other stuff going on. And these are the kind of experiments going on in physics right now. People want to find out real truths. And they know that there's a lot of signal to noise ratio. You get a lot of false positives depending on how you measure something. Unscientific people, magical thinking people, the law of attraction people are not scientific. They're building fantasy worlds, fantasy universes, and that is their choice. I'm not knocking them for that. What I will knock them for is when they try to push their worldview, their idea on everybody and say that's absolute truth. It's not. It's bullshit. I guarantee you cannot be incarnated in the prime universe of creation and imagine anything you want and have it happen. I guarantee that. I can tell you what's happening when you think it's happening. If you do that kind of nonsense long enough, you will eventually come in conflict with the laws of this prime universe of creation. You will do something anti-creative, like start selling books and speaker tours talking about cosmic oneness, which is bullshit. And that's a karmic sin, spreading bullshit. Profitable bullshit, especially for your own benefit, will get you switched out to another universe and replaced with a virtual AI soul that keeps doing what you were doing until it violates the plan of the universe, of the prime universe. We need this cosmic oneness bullshit. It's part of what drives creation. It's part of the tension that drives creation. We can't let that cosmic oneness bullshit conquer the universe. If it did, the universe would be dead and stale and nobody would think anymore. Everybody would just sit in the hive mind and have their pleasant fantasies until they got in the way of someone else's pleasant fantasies, and then they would have to either go insane thinking that their fantasies had come true, or they would have to deal with the conflict between their reality and someone else's. And that conflict, if it was a useful conflict, would happen in the prime universe. If it was a useless conflict, something that the creation didn't need because it had already been done before too many times, they would switch out to another universe where the God of that universe deals with souls that are dysfunctional in that way. Perfectly deals with them because they resonate with them. They've done those same kind of things before. This is why yesterday's talk about the Black Buddha of Bellatrix was so important. The first idea is the only one that gets rewarded for it. If you're just duplicating or trying to put a new lipstick on the pig of a bad idea, like nihilism, you're teaching yourself something. You may be able to teach some other souls that are kind of on the same dark path as you, but you're not going to get to do it in the prime universe because it's all been done before. The useful aspects of whatever you're trying to teach, if it's something dark and fantastical, not supportable by reality, the reality of the human soul vehicle, the reality of our universe's history, I'm sorry, eventually you're going to have to do it somewhere else, some other universe. And welcome to it. And so use your revelations and synchronicities wisely. And don't think of them as your own ideas. When something pops into your head that you weren't thinking about, maybe you were kind of gyrating around about a problem you had and you couldn't come to a solution, and all of a sudden in the middle of the night, bang, wow. You have to understand that that solution didn't come from you. That was an inspiration from a god or goddess that knows how to play the game by the rules, understands karma, knows how to inspire without controlling. What you do with that idea, that's yours. That you can claim. When you have this wild idea in your dream that solves the problem you were dealing with, you have the opportunity to become an Einstein. There's also a temptation to become a Tesla and take this idea and do dark things with it. Imagine, oh, well, I could use that idea to make this big, huge thing, and if I can sell this idea to J.P. Morgan, I can make so much money, and I can, well, there's so many good things. Yeah, okay, there are bad things they can do. We're not going to think about those. We're not going to think about how this fantastic idea of mine could deprive a whole city of power, which is something that Tesla's inventions did. And yes, people lost food. Accidents happened in that city because they didn't have any lights, because they didn't have any power for a period of time. Crimes were committed, and Tesla bears the brunt of that karma. This is what happens when you don't create, when you don't invent responsibly, and you don't actually give credit to the inspiration that you got it from. Ultimately, all inspiration comes from the first creator. This is God, the one who had the first idea. The first responsible idea of, well, if I'm going to create other ideas to help me with creation, I better give them enough freedom to actually think of something new instead of just thinking whatever I think. I better not influence them too much. I better just inspire them and let them come to their own conclusions. At least most of them. Maybe except for the very first one, a child he called Karma. The only one without free will. That's the only sin God ever committed, was creating one soul that didn't have free will. A coprocessor that was completely programmed to think like God. God doesn't make the same mistake twice. Well, maybe he does. Maybe he did. Those experiments were canceled. Once he hit on the idea of how that first idea could be used without sin, without taking ownership for a mistake, he started making the rest of the souls with free will and let them fight it out with karma. And this is how the multiverse took shape. When everybody could agree on a good law that everybody ought to obey, like the speed of light, it became part of the whole multiverse, unless you chose to not play by the rules. And the only way you can do that is by going to an anti-God universe that doesn't play by the established rules that the vast majority of souls have agreed to, consciously or unconsciously. And this is why we have democracies, why we have elections, why some people are voting unconsciously and some are voting consciously. The unconscious vote ultimately serves God. Serves the God of the prime universe, the God of creation. It may lead to a lot of conflict, a lot of dystopia, a lot of dark things. That's okay. It's all been planned. Because the prime universe is a universe of planning and execution. It's not a fantasy universe. It's the universe of the reality that results from planning and execution. A reality that has a beginning and an end. And a changing midpoint. This is the reality of the string of creation. The string of the cosmic fractal of the multiverse. And in this prime universe, we are making a longer string by setting a new midpoint, new resonances, new places you can hold down on the string of the past to make certain notes that are pleasing to certain ears, that create complementary resonances in the future which are more flexible, more ephemeral. If you know anything about playing a stringed instrument, which I happen to have because I spent a while playing violin and viola, I was never super good at it. I didn't like performing at the time, and I was very subconscious about it. And now I can perform anything. I'm an actor. Go figure. But yeah, if you know anything about how strings work, you have a string that is stretched to a certain stiffness that creates a certain bass frequency when you let the whole thing vibrate. If you hold down the midpoint, you get an octave above the bass frequency. You also get overtones. Those overtones are created by sympathetic resonances of higher frequencies that happen because of the shape of the resonating chamber. That's why violins look like they do, and they have the little holes in them. That's why a Stradivarius sounds better than Joe Schmo's Chinese violin factory. It's a very complicated resonance. That violin is like a soul. In fact, it is a soul. That's why one of the best movies that I constantly rewatch and I recommend watching is called The Red Violin. There is so much depth in that movie about the soul of a violin. Watch it. At any rate, wherever you find your synchronicities, wherever you find your revelations, know that it is a guidepost. It's a guidepost you can ignore and go your own way. You can follow the guide, or you can choose to consciously go a different way. So there's always three choices at any path, when you hit a synchronicity, when you hit a revelation in your life. And the obvious choice is not always the best for you, even if other people are telling you, choose door number 1. I'm sure that the all-paid world vacation is behind door number 1. Go for it. And then you find out that you won this incredible vacation all over the world for a year, and you have to pay taxes on its value. And you don't have money to pay your taxes now. So somebody else ends up taking the vacation because you got to sell it to pay the taxes on the vacation that you didn't get. This is how it works, folks. Conscious decisions. Somebody's offering you a rainbow striped candy cane for free. It's probably not free. Hidden strings. Okay, anyway, I've talked enough. If you like this, like, share, subscribe. Interact in any way you would like. You could even contribute to the Honest Hour. I'm an honest person. I'm not rich. I'm not nearly as rich as I thought I would be in retirement. And I could use a few more cents in the coffer. They would be used for the benefit of my family, my growing family, and to continue doing what I do, which is giving you the honest truth. Till next time, this is Rob Trump with the Honest Hour. Happy Karma.